Hey, welcome back to Guardbeardia. Today I have for you the next chapter or section part of the Veil Riders. But before that, we actually have some fan art to put up this time. So this is from Eggplant on the Discord server. And as you can see, he drew Chickily in one of his little styles. And then actually drew the patch down there on him as well. Looks really nice. I think it's funny how it's an absolute opposite of what I drew. He drew like a cool harpy guy and I drew a fucking trash goblin. But yeah, if you guys have fan art for the series, just join the Discord server, post it in the art and stuff section, and I'll put it up here whenever it comes in. But other than that, thanks for being here and let's get to the story. After Eris had departed from Yule's company, Olivera also left to gather herself and mull over what she had learned. She made the excuse of needing to talk to the cooks about some matters with the meat freshness, and boogied out of the dining area to leave Yule alone. She expected perhaps an old fling, or a partner departed on somewhat more amicable means. But this just added a whole new level of intricacy to the mysterious plot of Yule. After a few more hours had passed, the rest of the Veil Riders were finally able to drag themselves down from their beds, and Chickily rousted from his chair nest to take a parcel of letters to some of the nobles staying in the city of Immelnors. As his Veil Riders breakfasted around him, bickering still about the topics of last night, Olivera would poke her head out from around the corners of the staff area to peek at Yule. He still sat there, writing out more letters and correspondence while chatting to his troopers and asking them how they slept, or if they needed anything. When she felt comfortable enough to go behind the bar, she busied herself with cleaning glasses and tankards left over from the night before. Something was bugging Olivera though. How the hell can a man still be mourning after 3 years? She understood the reasons behind it all, but to never even give yourself the liberty of at least enjoying the comforting touch of another person? To share a bed and stay warm against each other, flesh to flesh. The thought of suffering for so many years alone filled her with enough mixed emotions that it really threw off her in-hustle that she usually did with easy stride. What she gleaned from this morning, she kept to herself. Even the recipe of the tea stayed secret to her, and she didn't tell the other bar workers what she had learned. She was not folly either. She knew she never cared for marriage. 4 failures at the shtick left her fed up with the whole affair, and simply took pleasure in the partner she accompanied to her chambers every once in a while when the fancy took her. But 3 years. 3 years wrapped up in the blanket of grief was too much, even for the most stubborn of people. Unhealthy even. It was no wonder that man never got any sleep and was constantly sucking down anything with a drop of caffeine in it. Olivera steeled herself, slapping a wet rag onto the bar top as she once again studied Yule, who was getting up to leave. She pried harder, gripping and ripping at any thought that came her way, tucking them into her mind as if she were a pickpocket in the market square. "I'll bed you for your own health, if not for my own liking," she murmured, and pulled out another glass from under the storage area. Outside, Yule stretched in the sun, his spine crackling like someone wringing a bundle of spaghetti noodles. It was really nice that Olivera had him taste test that tea she brought earlier. Bringing back old memories was not really as nice, nor was unloading that heavy shit onto her. He thwacked his hat onto his thigh to get some dust off of it, and quietly wished he'd just keep his mouth shut sometimes. As he whacked his hat, the amulet jingled inside of the rim and he checked it while the thought was on his mind. As he held it up to the sun, he saw the magical fluid inside was running low, and he once again sighed in frustration. Having to go and bug that poor woman for blood really weighed on Yule. He didn't like it, no matter how readily she was to do so. It was an evil that, while necessary, he could live without. He figured he would give Yeth this time to relax. He knew a little bit of the Valley Elf Tunka and was doing his damnedest to learn more just to ease the burden off of Yethis. Yule checked in with the NCOs idling outside the inn, who were working on retrofitting some kind of weird dwarvish polearm to the front of a Humvee, and went for a little walk to get some fresh air, see the market, and think. He liked to walk and think. It was something he did all the time on Terra when he was stumped about something, or had a worry on his mind. Yule was getting reports from Zerg Company that more Valley Elves were fleeing from the smaller villages east from the Vale, flooding the north and northeast. Thankfully, those kingdoms were on good, if not friendly terms with the Valley Elves, and were taking the refugees in with a stride. Yule waved to Ermstronge as he passed his shop, and talked to a group of school kids walking down the road in a gaggle around their teacher, asking them how the morning was as he passed, and they all yelled out their answers to him while giggling. Yule's friendly smile faded like a ghost from his face as he returned to his mind in the reports from Coco. Coco's Veil Riders were having to employ hit-and-run guerrilla tactics to buy time for the Valley Elves, and had accomplished the goal of seizing multiple vehicles from the Blue Helmets as well, including a goddamn M1117. Fully armed with its Mark 19 automatic grenade launcher and the M2 beside it. They used it mostly for hauling around the mortars, as fuel was short on hand. Zerg Company had minor losses here and there, and were taking up the majority of the combat actions from the Veil Riders as a whole, and were slowly folding Valley Elves into their ranks and arming them with the spare weapons they had on hand. He rounded the street corner and came out onto the market square, which was bustling with traders and stalls hawking their vegetables or other wares. Yule breathed in deep the sense of sweat, charcoal smoke, and leather that hung around the place. It was as close as he could get to a military surplus store, and it anchored him as close to reality as he could manage. As he browsed a rack of weird rings and jars, he thought about the Veil. If the forces coming from the Vale were able to transport and put together an armored vehicle of all things, he was going to have to push his timetable forward by months in order to combat the leaps and bounds of materials the Op-4 were getting from Terra. He gave a sigh and knew he needed more intel on the site for both he and Coco, and that would mean either hiring more Harpies on private order or talking to Severus, the thought of which brought goosebumps to his flesh. Yule decided to tackle the first thing, and that was hiring more scouts. He patted the money pouch he kept in his battle vest pocket, which jangled heavily with coin. Selling technological advances was keeping his Veil Riders well paid, but he kept the lion's share just for occurrences like this. Hanging proudly from a low, long building was a sign reading "Pump-a-Rum Package Service," out of which the chittering of harpy speak echoed. Yule put his hat on tight to his head, and opened the door to the rather unenthusiastic mug of Roland, the man who ran the place and did most of the bookkeeping. Beside him was a wide-eyed horned owl harpy named Noria, that helped him manage the packing ledgers, as they had a few extra digits on their wings that allowed them to hold a pen somewhat accurately. They both greeted him in their own fashions, Noria being chipper, while Roland sounded as if he could just give up on life at any moment. Yule put it in order for 6 of their sneakiest harpies they had in the place, and Noria stepped away to go fetch them. As she did, she twisted her neck 180 degrees to the rear and peered at him with her bright yellow eyes. "Are you fine with any harpy, Mr. Yule?" "Yep, thank you." Yule's stomach turned as she smiled and twisted her head back around. He understood why she could do it, but damn it to hell if it wasn't the freakiest thing in the world to see. Roland busied himself with doing paperwork, leaving Yule to rock back and forth on his boot heels until Noria arrived with a little gang of harpies behind her. Most of these were male, with only one of the 5 being female. These were a curious bunch, and reminded him a lot of nighthawks from back home. Their hair and feathers were stippled and camouflaged to the point they could probably fall into a pile of leaves and never be found, which was helped by their almost sun-kissed skin and dark, almost black eyes. Even more curious were their facial markings, which looked a lot like freckles, but ranged in size and shape. Probably camouflage as well if Yule had to make a guess. They introduced themselves as the Brush Feathered, and were keen to be paid for their work first and foremost. They didn't even ask what the work was, just how much coin would be jingling in their pockets. This caught Yule off guard, but he rallied quickly and told them to follow him. The Brush Feathered followed him outside, down the street, and finally into the Sparkling Unicorn, in which Yule then began to explain his plan. For a hefty sum of gold, they were to collect intelligence as close to the camp as possible, even getting as close to hear people talking, or even read things left out in the open. The Brush Feathered told him this would be no problem. "We've been paid to sneak before. This will be no different. Brush Feathers know how to not be seen," one spoke up, an older male who grinned at Yule with pearly white fangs. Yule could understand their aptitude for subterfuge. These harpies lacked any real claws, digits, or even long fangs for combat. Yule confirmed the deal with them, gave them some spare BDU and Flecktarn shorts, as well as a few ghillie suits that they could use if they believed they could come in handy. The Brush Feathered snatched them up almost immediately, and were talking excitedly in their mother tongue about the strange suits for some time. After leaving to retrieve their own specially made satchels and pack sacks, Yule went up to talk to Brita. She was reading inside her room, having been given her rucksack after she identified it from the loot, and looked up to Yule as he opened the door. "Going to stick another splinter in me?" Yule asked, raising his eyebrows as the guard outside her door also leaned to the side to peek in at her. "No, would be a shame to ruin your nice uniform again." "Ha ha," Yule mused in a low tone and crossed his arms. "I'm sending out some tourists to the Vale base you have set up. I want you to write me a few already have." Brita interrupted, her face set as she pulled out 10 sheets of parchment with names written on them, and the other sides littered with paragraphs of German in tight, orderly script. Yule couldn't help but smile as he reached over and took the papers in a cool manner. Peak German efficiency. Brita snorted and opened her book back up. Yule closed the door behind him, then pressed his patrol cap to his scalp, but the letters didn't change as they usually did. Yule growled out a heckin' heck to the ceiling of the inn before rumbling down the stairs and looking for Yethis. She was thankfully bugging Gremlin, sitting next to her and brushing her hair as she played Dwarf Fortress on her laptop. Yule made his way to her and tapped her on the shoulder. "Sorry, lovely, no blood," he said in Tunka to her, and Yethis spun around on her rump to face him. In the blink of an eye, she had her special little dagger out and had sliced open her finger, while rummaging in her side pouch for the other ingredient, something they called True Earth ink. Yule watched her slice open her flesh with gathered eyebrows, glaring down at the little wound as he pulled out his amulet. He hated this part. He really did. She pulled the stopper out with her teeth, the sharp pop of it causing her to smile around the cork in her mouth. The dark, inky liquid flowed into the amulet Yule held in his fingers, which she recorked and then placed her finger over the lip of the well, letting her blood drain slowly into the amulet. She smiled up at him and wrinkled her nose while wiggling back and forth on her rump. Unknown to Yule, Yethis took this as a great honor. That her blood was the one to fuel the amulet that he would use, as well as being his personal healer. She felt a bit silly for fainting when he needed her, but still counted the healing as her own doing, since it was her blood that was used after all. Yethis was known as a clean blood, an elf whose blood was rich and flowing with the necessities that were needed for strong, formidable magic. She took a lot of pride in this. And to be serving a commander of the Vale Riders was an honor all in itself. When the amulet well was full, she licked her finger clean by poking it in her mouth and tapped the amulet to get it back to working again. Yule tucked it up into his hat, then placed it on his head before speaking to her. "I don't like this, you know." Yetha smiled up at him from around her finger before pulling it from her mouth and wiping the saliva on her pant leg. I know that. You've told me enough, but it has to be done. Not the only thing. They both just barely heard, and they turned to see Olivara walking away with a tray loaded with empty mugs. Yethus glared at her, standing up and brushing past Yule to stalk after her. Yule went to speak up, but the front door of the Sparkling Unicorn thudded open, and the brush feathered were back with their equipment, calling after Yule while Veil Rider stood behind them and tucked random goodies into their sacks. Yule quickly read through the letters as he made his way towards the chittering harpies, who were pumped up for the mission given to them and buzzing with anticipation. He didn't see anything negative in the letters as he read, and began folding them up into squares. Besides the random things tucked into their sacks, the harpies were given some rations, water, and a few knives just in case they needed to saw or cut away at anything. Yule then gave them the letters, and gave them examples of the unit flags they should look out for, them being the German, Polish, and Czech flags respectively. After everything was double-checked, the brush feathered set off on foot out into the grasslands to move on the ground during the day, then fly during the night to avoid detection. Yule turned back into the inn while rubbing his temples, and calling out for Domino and the other NCOs. When they were gathered, he sent them off to do supply checks on their troopers, everything from ammunition to the amount of money they still had on them. There was a small issue of Veil Riders blowing all their money on stupid stuff and not giving the inn a small portion of it, whether that was in tips or paying for their food. While the city was paying for a lot of the supplies and space the Veil Riders took up, that didn't mean he wanted he and his troopers to look like bums. Hours were buzzing by as Yule went to and fro, doing housekeeping on his unit, when for the second time that day the door was kicked open. Yule turned to see who it was, just having set off to see how many mechanics he had total for Humvee checkups. For fuck's sakes. Oi, Veiling! Yule's previous gentle temple rubbing turned into vigorous massaging as Fuckit Elwrench shouldered past the door, and two of his engineers following behind him. Chicks rolled her eyes, shutting the door for them with a sigh of her boot while clicking her teeth in annoyance. Fuck it! How are you? I thought you were still back in your hold. I just sent a letter. Takes too long, so I came here. He interrupted, and pointed to a table in the corner while walking over to it. Chick's blonde eyebrows shot up, and she smirked mockingly at Yule while jutting out her lips. Shut up. You're lucky you don't have to deal with this shit. Yule grumbled, and walked over to the dwarves while Chicks chuckled and brought her ale tanker to her lips. Yule, for one, was getting tired of being interrupted, and waved over at the bar area for some drinks. Olivara wasn't there anymore, and neither was Yethus, but a bar woman saw him and began pouring drinks for the dwarves. He sat down at the table, and looked into the face of Fuckit. Fuckit was an engineer prince, son of Snorri Elwrench, who was Thane of the engineering hold called Kerbedir. Snorri, as it turns out, was the first dwarf he met in the city, the same one that almost crushed his hand, and had sent his son Fuckit to try and garner some designs from the Veil Riders. These dwarves of Kerbedir were all in on the Icelandic look, and for all Yule knew, probably invented it themselves. Hair short cropped on the sides while being long on the top, bearded hair and beards adorned with strategically placed gold beads and spiraling dragons that curled through the rough hair, and all of them had long walking axes that really reminded Yule of a certain dwarf that was famous for sprinting short distances. He could see from the crossed pistols on the chest of the female engineer that they were already headlining a dwarven semi-automatic pistol of sorts, which looked oddly like a Sig P226. Except chunkier and covered in runes. Yule nodded towards them. How many of those are there? The dwarf female chuckled and gave her bountiful chest a jiggle. Just two, love. Yule cast his eyes heavenward as all the dwarves at the table hooted and slapped the tabletop, roaring with laughter at his expense. I fucking swear. Yule thought to himself, as the barmaid made her way over and began setting down tankards that were peaked with foam. Now that she had made them jiggle, Yule had to fight to keep his eyes up and off of her, and the she-dwarf was certainly taking notice, hooding her eyes and folding her arms under her breasts so they looked even more prominent. You know what I mean, ma'am. Snorri only had a quick hand on my pistol for but a few minutes, and you've already managed to make something that looks like a proper semi-automatic pistol. The she-dwarf smirked at Yule, and he felt her boot heel rest on top of his own boot's toe. Dwarves don't need long to make an idea a reality. We just need to get our hands on it for a while, and it all comes naturally. Yule quietly wished that Fockett had chosen a bigger table, and had to keep moving his foot to keep the dwarf from trying to pin it down with her own. For Frid's sakes, Gilda, leave him be, spoke up the other engineer, before motioning to Fockett and then taking a drink from his tankard. Right, began Fockett. I'm sure you heard from down south those old Utharian bastards are getting a big head of themselves and snatching up folk, as well as using your people's resources to seek their own gains. Ain't good, not at all. We need to increase water production and begin pumping out weapons that can contend with yours. My sister went over to see your friend Coco and is already taking plans for those things they call danger tubes back to the hold. I ain't going to yank you around on this. We need one of your rifles to take back, and one you would recommend. We've been working hard on the quick to get up to date on those manufacturing techniques for the cartridges. Which, by the way, Fockett parted the drapes of the window and gestured. We have a nice little present for you. Yule leaned to the side and peered out to see there were crates sitting on the road by the Humvees, in which Vale Riders were crowding around and plucking handfuls of brand new gleaming ammunition and sprinkling them on each other. The dwarves around them laughed, and helped sprinkle the new ammunition on a female Vale Rider who was making a brass angel. Yule had to admit, these dwarves were slicker than goose shit when it came to getting jobs done quick. And now, Yule said, leaning back into his seat as Gilla winked and kissed her lips at him. Now, we want a present too, and no, Gilla, we stick to the plan, quit being weird. Fockett slapped Gilla on the shoulder with the back of his hand, and she laughed rakishly, as she was pointing at Yule and was about to lean over and say something to Fockett. Yule ignored her, and moved his jaw around as he thought, mulling over the fact that he really did owe Fockett for bringing this much ammunition and getting the jobs done within days when he had set aside entire months and time frames. He looked up to the dwarves. Pick a caliber. This single statement made all three dwarves turn on their serious faces, and they leaned in while gripping their tankards. That 5.56 round can fly forever, it seems like. Pass from mountain to mountain without much issue, stated the other male engineer. Aye, but that 7.62 has a lot of power behind it, purred Gilla. And once again Yule felt her boot start touching his. Both Yule and Fockett thought the same phrase at her tone of voice, and both of them glared at her as, "Please stop," filtered through their thoughts. Fockett flicked his eyes back to Yule. We were curious. After finding the materials, working on the alchemy behind the propellant, figuring out the right flash powder for the caps, we made some rough barrels and shot a few dummies just to see what they could do. We were a bit embarrassed this kind of design hadn't come to us sooner, as it's quite simple in principle once the kinks were worked out. You worked out the kinks in only a few days while it took us, well, more time. Anyway, I favor the 5.56. It holds up better at longer ranges and has less recoil. That being said, I also prefer the 7.62 by 51 when it comes to stopping power. Then there's the weapon issue, I suppose. Yule wasn't sure this was the right idea, but he stood up. I'll be right back. He left, and returned with his K2 and a spare FAL after a few minutes, setting them on the table. Of all the rifles I have used, this one has never failed me, and has performed better than any of my other rifles. Then this is a very iconic rifle that uses the 7.62 round, and is a favorite of my other co-commander, Coco. Here are a few magazines from the other rifles we use. He set the metal magazines next to the K2 in the FAL, having borrowed some from the Veil Riders who were using FALs and M14s, and his own Stanag magazine. If I were to hedge my bets, these rifle designs would serve you well on either caliber, and I don't doubt you guys can figure out the simple human science behind it. We could also use more magazines if you can find the way to get them out to us. Fawkett clapped his hands together cheerfully. Excellent! Are you sure you don't mind? This is your personal rifle after all. Yule looked down at the K2 laying on the table and nodded. It's fine. Just treat her nice and bring her back when you're done. Fawkett and the other male engineer grinned toothily and began to get up, draining their tankards as they did and grabbing the K2 as well as the FAL. Gilla stood up after gathering the magazines together, and when Yule had gotten up from his seat, he bumped him with her hip. Need anything else taken care of while I'm here? Her eyes crinkled with humor as she grinned up at Yule, who looked down at her while trying to keep his eyes away from her deep cleavage. You really are horrible. Gilla cackled and slapped Yule on the seat of his pants as she walked behind him and strode towards the door where her fellow dwarves were exiting out into the midday sun. She stood at the door and gave him another sultry wink. I know, she breathed, and closed the door behind her when she left. Chicks had an eyebrow raised, looking from the door over to Yule from where she leaned against the wall. Man, men probably go into her as a salami and come out a Slim Jim from muscles that strong. Chicks, please, don't. I would like to enjoy my lunch here in a bit. Yule sulked and wiped a bit of sweat from his brow. Where the hell was the bit in the stories about dwarf women being man-eaters? Chicks just chuckled to herself, more at her own joke than anything, then nodded and spoke in Tunka. Hey, Yethis. Yule turned, and behind him Yethis stood, beaming her bright smile and holding a mug in both of her hands. Out of the mug came the spiraling scent of cinnamon and the sweet smell of comfort. Yethis held out the mug to him. Olivar said you might need this after that mean dwarf woman. What's in it anyways? Smells kind of like bug repellent. And that's the end of this chapter. The next chapter to come, either Thursday or Friday. As always, if you like this video and others liked them, be sure to like and subscribe to Garbeardia and click the bell icon so you get the notification when the video is uploaded. Additionally, stop by Neckbeardia and get even more weird-ass D&D stories and other such stories that you can enjoy through the week as well. But really, thanks for stopping by and supporting my channel. This wouldn't be possible with you guys, as I'm sure you know. Someone's got to be there to listen, alright? And also be sure to stop by the Discord. Wouldn't mind seeing that hopping and popping more. And if you're a doodler or an artist or a hobbyist, I mean, if you want to draw art, draw art. I ain't gonna stop you. Drop it in the Discord. I'll put it in the video. I'll show it off. I promise. This has been Guard Bro, and I'll see y'all next time on this side of the veil.
All those moments will be lost in time.